The 1920s seemed like a prosperous time. Employment was up, inflation was almost non-existent, production was up, per capita income was up, and it really seemed to support the laissez-faire capitalist practices of the Republicans that were in office during the 1920s. The problem was that this prosperity was mostly an illusion. There were signs throughout the 1920s and actually leading into the 1930s that the prosperity was about to crash, and eventually we can look back with hindsight and see why it crashed. During the 1920s, the income gap grew. The wealthy were getting wealthier, they were getting a higher proportion of the income, and the poor were getting more poor. In fact, a majority of the population was living below the poverty line, which would be about $2,500 in 1929. Today, that's roughly equivalent to about $13,000 a year. So wages were falling even though productivity was up. Workers were working harder but not getting paid as much. This means that the companies that were making all this money were not passing on the prosperity. They were not giving their workers higher wages, which means that even though we have this new consumer economy, the workers couldn't even buy the products that they were making. And oftentimes, this triggered that installment buying that we saw. Now, this is like that sugar rush for the economy. The population, middle class especially, the working class as well, were buying items on credit. But by the end of the 1920s, all of the installment credit had been taken up, and people had to start paying their bills back. They had run out of credit. This led to a drop in demand. That drop in demand meant that there was going to be a drop in spending. That drop in spending meant that the factories and the businesses had to lay off workers, which the cyclical nature of this means that once they laid off workers, the demand went down, spending goes down, which means more layoffs and so forth. So it's this vicious cycle that the country got into. One key misconception we need to avoid. The stock market crash did not cause the Great Depression. The Great Depression was caused by all of these other factors: overproduction, the wage gap, the income gap. The stock market crash signaled the start of the Great Depression. Much like when I sneeze, that doesn't cause my cold. It's merely a signal that I have a cold.